First off, we're going to be talking about Kristin Hayter, or the Reverend Kristin Michael Hayter, to give her her full title, as she has proclaimed herself here, on her first album, leaving behind the moniker of Lingua Ignota. It's called Saved. Under that name, she cemented herself as one of the most engrossing, provocative, captivating artists working in music today, I think. And I'm going to assume most of you have heard the Lingua Ignota albums if you're listening to us, particularly garnering a wider audience and acclaim on 2019's Caligula. That's one of the heaviest albums ever made. The follow-up, Sinner Get Ready, I think is a near masterpiece, just like an album with a staggering amount of depth and richness and haunting power. I was speaking about all this, earlier when we did the last Lingua Ignota shows last weekend. That project has been laid to rest, primarily out of wanting to move past the kind of constant association with trauma that she had to excise on those albums and moving into something different. It's obviously not that long till we had more music from Kristin Hayter, though. Less than a year since she actually announced she'd be retiring Lingua Ignota, and obviously a week from, fully doing it. She's fucking wild. Like, I have so much respect for her, but the length she will go to and what she will put into making an album like this, an album that compared to the Lingua Ignota albums is meant to be a bit easier, right? But she'll just drop things like, I learned to speak in tongues for this album. And you go, I'm sorry, what do you mean you learned to speak in tongues for this album?
I mean, the argument that this is any easier than the Lingua Ignota albums is completely absurd to me. It's challenging in a completely different way, but my notes are sort of all over the place. I have no idea how to review this. I have no idea what I even think about it. It's fascinating. Like, can you use a normal album where you go track by track and look at things like that? It's such a just bizarre kind of piece of performance art that has fascinated and kind of disturbed me in different ways than Lingua Ignota did.
Yeah, everything post Lingua Ignota has been no less beguiling than Lingua Ignota. Like, the whole way this was just rolled out. And for me, Lingua Ignota is one of those, like you say, artists that, for me, it's in the league of Crass or Throbbing Gristle or Swans or anyone you want to name.
It's an I was there moment.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't, but in theory,
you were there at the time.
You were there to witness the album.
Yeah. I was actually there, by the way, just in case.
But and then when she said, "I'm moving on to something else," we knew it was going to be interesting. And I mean, the moniker, it still sounds like a WWE wrestler. It's never not going to. And this record, again, the presentation of it was kind of it's kind of like a gospel record, and it's just got some gospel staples and some originals. I thought that would be nice, and it's fucking uncanny. It's like, is it a gospel album? Is it avant-garde? Is it spoken word? Country and western? Is it all of them? Is it none of them? I don't know.
She'll do the kind of the cheery gospel song, and then the second song after it will be the other kind of the other side of the coin, but in that dark Kristin Hayter kind of oppressive atmosphere sort of thing, and it's fascinating in that way. But yeah, I'm still trying to work. We've had this album for 2 days, and I'm still just scratching my head at what this all means.
Yes, she's a different brand of artist from anything we'll be talking about. This is the only haunted church music album that we will review this year, and going into an album like this, it's so much more, nuanced than just how are this band going to grow from their last one. She's done something that I've said a few times that I quite admire, in that she's deliberately not tried to approach this with the mindset of I'm writing a magnum opus here. This is not Sinner Get Ready or Caligula. It's a step into another manner of creating entirely. And it's complicated to talk about, maybe even more so than those were, because it's as much like a kind of anthropological experiment here as it is, a heavy album. Because I guess a dumbed down one sentence pitch of this album would be, she's exploring this matter of kind of faith and personal salvation, like the title expresses, through this recording of Christian hymns like they're on old tapes dug up from the 1920s. The making of this album is just such a different proposition. It's full of beaten up old tape machines, integrating of decades-old material that was already on the tapes, chopping them up, warping them, twisting them, melting them. It must have some fucking nightmare workshop in there making this thing, in a literal physical sense. And it feels like an album released in 2023, comprised of dilapidated old recordings from 100 years earlier.
It sounds haunted.
Yeah, right? Filled with this dead, haunted... It's like a cursed videotape, this album.
It like I said, when I hit play on this, I genuinely wasn't sure if my headphones were working properly. I had to.
It's at its most extreme on the first track, which feels like a kind of audience baiting moment.
Because I was just my like not putting my Bluetooth headphones, and they kept. I was like, are they cutting out? What is going on with my headphones? And then I was like, hang on a second. Okay, I got it, but it genuinely fucked me for a bit at first. And there are so many other moments like that across the record where it's just kind of like, wait, did like the sort of the speaking in tongues sort of thing, which pops up every now and then obviously on the closing track is the thing, but it is a just unsettling, bizarre album for so much.
I kind of love that first song does what it does sonically in terms of like just literally dropping out, fucking re-spooling the tape, whatever, as you're listening to it. Like again, this album, it feels deliberately contrived to be like as grubby and warped as possible to make it feel like this artifact, like even less than Lingua Ignota was. Is this something where you're just going to go and enjoy the songs, right? Like that had extreme care poured over the Sonics. This does too, but to make them worse. Like it's such a strange, disarming bit of the experience to have this first track do what it does, while ironically she's singing "I'm gonna get out," you know, while I still can. It's like a fucking warning at you.
Listening to this for the first time, it reminded me of the first time I saw Skinamarink, where I was listening to it and I was going, that's weird, that's odd, I don't know what's going on there. Why am I scared? What's happening? Why am I alone? Like how that film creeps up on you, where you just go like, nothing's happened, and I'm going to have an anxiety attack. This has that sort of thing where I was almost laughing for the first couple of songs because I was going, she's having a jolly, she's turning the knobs up and down, she's putting in these weird little bits. And then, for no reason that was sort of I was consciously aware of, I was really disarmed and kind of hypnotised by the record.
Anxious is like that anxiety thing. That's how this album made me feel on first listen. Like,
yeah, and I can't remember the last time I heard a record that felt both so timeless and like it couldn't have come up at any other time than this. Because it's 100 years of music kind of mangled. So you couldn't have it any earlier, but yet it feels kind of ancient. It feels weird that I was listening to it on Spotify.
Yeah,
it doesn't seem like an album you can download.
Yeah. The end 10 seconds of that as well, where you had just really loud babbling on repeat listens. It ends up feeling like a kind of horrible foreshadowing of like where the record ultimately ends.
Like, that's what I was talking about when it ends up.
There are a couple of very different brands of track, I guess, on this that I guess we'll talk about separately. The longer, there are tracks on this that are recognisable very much as being like, if you follow the Lingua Ignota material, you can go, yeah, that's Kristin Hayter doing her, that's how she kind of approaches writing a song in that way. And stuff like Idumea, which is probably an acronym, something that I'm not aware of.
I Will Be With You Always.
Yeah, one, I'll Be With You Always as well, majorly. They're built on the same kind of like droning, heavy, low-end piano progressions that a lot of Lingua songs were. So for me, that locks me into a kind of similar rhythm. I'm with it. Has this particular scratchy sonic approach this time, where you could hear the strings inside the piano like rattling and shaking as the keys strike them. It's so raw and unflinching as a sound. And May This Comfort and Protect You is a song where the piano chords that she's playing are genuinely like beautiful, right? And it's a major key uplifting song. But it has this rattling harshness to it from inside the piano itself, and the reverberation the recording is picking up. And it's the way the sonic approach of these things on the surface, simple bits of music are kind of, they unspool all of these other layers of it. Like Idumea as well has like something like 12 voices of hers tracked in there, just chilling you to your core. The reverse of that is, I'll Be With You Always. It's just the one, Kristin there, but in this kind of weeping delivery, like almost this spoken narration on this track, and occasionally breaking into these like really histrionic falsetto singing parts. And that feels like the kind of, Lingua show that I saw on the first night of the London ones, just an almost kind of stream of consciousness, bareness to it.
Yeah, I will always be with you. I Will Be With You Always, I think, might be the best like original song on the record. Like, genuinely beautiful. And Lingua Ignota was capable of that. But because it was so arresting and cruel, you can never really give yourself over to it entirely, I don't think. And this record is I've already said alarming, disarming in its own way. But that sort of like release me refrain, when that comes in,
Yeah.
it's like a moment of where it feels like a praise song. And for a few seconds at least, you're kind of unaware that you're listening to something like this record. Like the thing that song reminded me of was Current 93 have an album called The Inmost Light, which is sort of like an Uncanny Valley lullaby as an album, where it's like it gets so close to being genuinely soothing without being soothing that it's actually kind of distressing. This song has that kind of quality to it, and I think that's the exact sort of thing I wanted going into this, and one of the moments where I was kind of... I got what I wanted and I liked it, even if I like the things that surprised me as well.
Yeah, I like when she just goes... taps into that kind of like aged Americana fire and brimstone folk music. Like, All My Friends Are Going to Hell, lifting the melody from War Pigs, sure. But, for someone who has, in person, one of the most stunning voices you've ever heard, I love how Kristin is able to sing ugly. Like, she puts this harshness and this bites. Almost at times this album sounds like a kind of like harsh southern twang, but the way she leans on that word, hell, like it is hellish, and she doesn't filter anything. She lets things sound bitter and coarse. And then it'll flip between these long, like larger compositions and these old-timey traditional songs with like, There Is Power in the Blood. Just this really jolly fucking like church circle song singing about the blood of the lamb. Like, it rides that line between being like rallying and kind of upsetting. The fucking transition into Precious Lord Take My Hand after this like 6.5 minute piano song, essentially like a June Carter Cash song. it's so, and the actual recording sound kind of degrades as well, and it creates this effect on this album where it's like her songs have almost been like recorded over a tape featuring something older, and occasionally they break back out in between the other things as like these ghostly memories. In some cases that's literally true. She tweeted the other day about some of the weird noises and shit that start some of the songs literally being what was on the tape before they recorded on it, and they have no idea who these people were or what that sound was. But it's a fascinating effect on this album. Like, you've got this kind of abyss of history kind of in front of you on it.
Yeah, I mean, those are like interlude songs. They're part of the ones that almost unsettle me more, because it's so like the whole Christianity thing is kind of like a hurdle for this album for me in a way that like it is one of those things I'm just like, I don't know, because it's so like happy clappy, isn't religion great and all that, and it generally kind of comes across as more creepier than juxtaposed against the darker stuff. And because it sounds so old and aged, and you're right, it sounds like those kind of ghosts of the past creeping out. It's just a constantly disarming and like unpredictable journey to go on.
See, like, I see what you're saying about the Christianity aspect, and I'm not religious myself, but the inclusion of these like legitimate gospel classics in the record, I think, is one of my favourite uses of interludes in as long as I can remember. And it's that thing where, it has got a kind of salvation element to it, but it's not like, Reba McEntire or something like that. It's not some clean-cut, country radio thing. It's like you're stood outside, you've come upon like a homemade chapel in the middle of the woods, and there's an impossible number of people inside it singing these songs, and you don't know why, you don't know who they are or anything like that. And what struck me was, she doesn't actually do very much with some of these interludes. Like, if you listen to the originals, they're not that wildly different. And I kind of love that, because it kind of makes the reason that they're creepy so much more, like, intangible and effortless.
No, totally.
Yeah, I think, like, I this is a really complex album to interrogate thematically, because, like, the Lingua Ignota albums were complex. But I think no matter how deep you decided to get into those, you could very clearly tell just on the top level that it was a woman in, deep pain, and that was just impossible to ignore. And no matter how further in you went, that just rawness of the feeling was just so palpable and was so unmistakable in what it was expressing that had power. This album is a lot more overtly, religious and about faith. And again, personally, that's not something that I have at all. But instead of being like, oh, those were my dark albums, now I'm writing big preachy songs about finding Jesus. She's not started writing Creed albums or whatever.
No, of course,
it's like, for her, this is kind of the positive album, but the process of getting there is really fucking harsh and scary. at times. And I think it's really interesting to hear if you were a fan of the Lingua albums, because, like I said, like I Will Be With You Always sounds a bit like Lingua Ignota tracks, but it's kind of the completion of that. It's like deliverance from that thing that was...
It's finding the salvation from the pain, and also that salvation doesn't come easily, is essentially what it is. Like,
and a lot of it sounds like more like violently peeling away from what was there on the Lingua albums. Like, I know His Blood Can Make Me Whole is another, like, the more beautiful kind of positive songs. But her delivery on it sounds like fucking shattered. And the way this album ends is, like, the most upsetting thing I've heard in ages. The song itself, like, the piano part of the song and her singing, it's calm, beautiful. Essentially, it could be like an outro track on any number of albums, right? Just, nice piano. But the way it is offset on those tape machines by... slowly throughout this like 8-minute track,
the speaking tongues getting gradually louder.
This ramping up and up of the speaking in tongues sort of thing that you've been slowly drip fed throughout it. It's like hearing someone undergo some kind of violent exorcism. Like she's kind of letting go of all of this stuff through this kind of like wordless babbling. And I guess she found some kind of catharsis out of that. But it's not a comfortable deliverance. You know, it's not presentable. It's not, oh, find Jesus and all your troubles will be done. It's like ending your I'm feeling better now album with that is such a mad fucking move.
Yeah, because this is because it's not just, you know, Christianity. She's gone to one of those like charismatic Christianity kind of like churches that do this whole like speaking tongues, exorcise your demons, and so that
and again, I think it's worth just highlighting again. This is not anyway a like preaching. This is, you should do this thing.
No,
it's a anthropological exploration of like what would it be like to be, you know.
Yeah, and she subjected herself to that as kind of like an exploration of can that heal her. But the fact she was so like, I didn't like willing, but so able to get caught up in that moment of that insane kind of like babbling. Like it feels like that doesn't feel put on. That feels like she has surrendered herself and let this whatever feeling it is take over her. And it's deeply unsettling. And again, I'm not trying to like condemn it. I don't know how to. Again, this is what I mean. Where I don't know how to approach a lot of this album because I don't know how I feel about a lot of these things. Where I'm like, is that a healthy thing for her to put herself through? Clearly, it's helped in some way if she's felt like this is her, like I say, I'm getting better album. But it's bizarre and
being in the recording session for that. It's been like fucking. You know, what would you say? Like, it might be the most uncomfortable thing Kristin Hayter's ever recorded because Caligula. Obviously, it's like absolutely immolating, but at least I can enjoy it in a musical fashion. You know, this is like stumbling on some fucking weird internet video that you wish you'd never seen.
Yeah. I'll tell you what. As much as we're saying, oh, it's not a preachy, you know, happy clappy record. After this song, I was hoping for. He's got the whole world. It is. I needed that because I've got to be honest. Like when this came in and it starts off as a sort of interpolation of this gospel classic again. I was like, oh, okay, fine. The album called Saved, with an exclamation mark, is going to end on some kind of clean-cut salvation after all of this, surely. And then it's a heart-stopping way to end the record. And like you say, maybe more uncomfortable and difficult to listen to than Caligula on the album called Saved, on the Salvation record. You just think, like, this is like you going back on a promise, Kristin Hayter, Reverend Kristin Hayter and your tag team, because... like, genuinely, like, alarming. And again, I thought, having heard all the Lingua Ignota records, I thought I was primed for it. I thought, what's she going to do that's going to, you know, how can she take me aback again when she was sort of the benchmark for uncomfortable, disturbing avant-garde music of the last decade?
Yeah, it's, you know, she I think on something like Sinner Get Ready, you could hear someone whose faith kind of was challenged in some way, at least through the concept of the record, you know, by the extremity of, you know, what was happening to her in life. And I was thinking, in terms of this, like, name change, again, I don't know exactly how she's sort of conceptualized it, but from a listener point of view, this is another one that feels like it could easily be a final Lingua Ignota album before a shift to something else, as much as it could be the first of something new, because either way, it's a clear conclusion, right? Or like a coda on that whole story and experience. And I have no fucking idea what that means to where she goes next. Like, whether she keeps the Reverend thing, or if that's just for this album, like, I don't know. But it's interesting because it's ugly, right? Like, it's not just faith music in the most generic, palatable sense. It would be fucking boring and not worth us covering to do so if it was that. She's always tapping into these, like, complicated, unflinching side of these things. And this album is, like, as weird and upsetting as it is someone finding some kind of peace. It's both of those things together. It's all of those contradictions. And the process of, like, you know, putting the sound together is massively different to the Lingua album, so I think it's reductive to hold that as, like, any kind of bar this has to clear. It's almost an exaggerated, extreme version of what I just said on the Svalbard album, in terms of, like, some people will really connect with it on a deep, fundamental level, and some people will merely kind of appreciate it. It's fascinating as a move, like, as an artifact. Yeah. Lingua Ignota was already making albums that no one else would make. This one, if not as fully fleshed out, is even more completely on its own island, I think. So she's done it again in terms of it's an album that you will hear absolutely nothing else like this year. So in that sense, it is worth hearing. It's called Saved. Kristin Hayter is, of course, her name. The Reverend Michael Kristin Hayter. All of that is in there.